Welcome. Thank you very much for registering and coming to our meeting this evening to talk about the future of farming. I think everyone's aware there's a lot of discussion at the moment about farming, what's going to happen to farming, what I suppose changes are coming down the road for farmers and for our rural communities. And, you know, we in the Social Democrats really feel that there hasn't been a huge discussion with farmers about what can be done, and I suppose what fears are and what the possibilities and the opportunities are as well. We know there's going to be a lot of challenges. How do we address those challenges, but also what opportunities are out there for the farming community and for our rural communities. So we have some great speakers this evening with us. And first I'm just going to I'll introduce myself actually first. I always forget to introduce myself. So I'm Jennifer Whitmore. I'm the Social Democrats spokesperson on climate, environment and biodiversity, and I'm a TD for Wicklow. We also have Holly Cairns, and I'm sure most of you know Holly. Holly is the Social Democrats spokesperson on agriculture and is herself a farmer, started off in dairy farming and now is in seed production and is from West Cork. We also have with us this evening, we have Kate Carmody. Kate, if you want to come into the room. So Kate is an organic farmer and she is an EU expert in agriculture, production and sustainability living down in County Kerry, and a biomedical scientist and environmentalist. So thanks a million, Kate, for joining us this evening. And we also have Rob Coleman, and Rob is a farmer who's interested in soil health, increasing biodiversity and growing quality Irish grain, and he's based in North County Cork. So Rob, thank you so much for coming along this evening as well. So just the format this evening, what we're going to do is Holly, Kate and Rob are going to talk for 5-10 minutes about, I suppose, what they see as the issues and the opportunities and what needs to be done, and then we're going to open it up to the floor because we want this to be quite an informal chat. We think we have quite a really good range of people listening in today as well, so hopefully we'll get a good conversation and discussion generated where we can start nutting out some of these issues. So Holly, we'll kick off with you. So and then from there we'll go to Kate and to Rob.
Thank you so much, Jen, and good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I suppose I'll just start off by saying I'm not sure, who's present this evening, and I hope we've got lots of people from farming communities, and I hope also we've people who are engaging on the issue of agriculture for the first time. And I suppose briefly to those people, I find that every time I do kind of talk about agriculture and agriculture policy, people who don't have an interest in farming tend to kind of glaze over and feel like that it doesn't have anything to do with them, and I completely get that. I think it can seem like a bit of a niche subject that doesn't really have anything to do with the vast majority of the public. But I suppose just to start off by saying that couldn't be further from the truth. I suppose we don't view the Department of Agriculture as a public service in the same way that we might view the Department of Health or the Department of Housing. But it is. Agriculture is how we feed ourselves as a nation, it's how we use our land, and it's how we sell our country to the world. And I don't think you can think of anything more important than how we feed ourselves. That's just to take one of those issues. As consumers, I suppose we have a right to know that our food is produced in a fair and ethical way. And I can tell you that at present it is not. And that is at the expense of the majority of Irish farmers. It's at the expense of migrant workers, and it's at the expense of consumers, and really at the expense of the environment and therefore future generations. This policy that we have, or the results we have in all of those different parts of our society, is a direct result of policies implemented by the Common Agricultural Policy and our Department of Agriculture here. The Department of Agriculture wields considerable yield, and they need to be held accountable by politicians and by the public. So I think we need to create a lot of awareness around these issues. And I think previously to going into politics myself, I thought that a lot more of our policy was based on Common Agricultural Policy. I didn't realise how much Ireland's Department of Agriculture's interpretation of Common Agricultural Policy has on the kind of result that we have in Ireland in our farming systems here at the moment. Just to give a bit of a background on why I'm particularly passionate about this issue, and it's ultimately why I got into politics. As Jen said, that I started off in dairy farming. I actually didn't. I grew up on a dairy farm, so I suppose to a certain extent I did. Yeah. When I was very young, when it was dairy farm, my mum was the farmer in the family, and she'd grown up on a farm in County Meath, and she always wanted to be a dairy farmer. So we grew up with a very small dairy farm, and I'm 32, so it's not that long ago when you consider me growing up on a dairy farm, and I was reared on the income of between 12 and 16 dairy cows. So just to give context, I think how much agriculture has changed, because by the time I was about 12 going into secondary school, maybe I was already in secondary school, my mum went out of milking, and I don't think that's something she particularly wanted to do. Like I said, she was really passionate about it. She used to make our cheese and our milk and our yogurt, and we loved going down to the creamery every day. It was part of our life and our culture. And she really had no choice. She had 2 daughters, single parent. It just wasn't cutting it anymore. And I suppose just to zoom out of that life that we were living in into the political decisions that were being made around this time, we're looking at Simon Coveney lifting the milk quotas. So that resulted in an more intensive farming model where you needed to have more cattle and more land and everything to actually make ends meet. So she went into dry stock farming, into beef, and once again, that really wasn't cutting it either. And we know that there's a kind of cartel-like model of beef in Ireland. And I remember in my first year as a TD, both mine and Jen's first year as a TD, we had the pandemic, and the dole was recalled. And I remember reading an article at the time that I don't think maybe it was the last time the dole had been recalled. It was on exactly the same date, and it was recalled because Larry Goodman was going into liquidation, and the Irish government recalled the dole on exactly the same date as we did during COVID to bail him out financially. So you can see the political will has always been behind intensifying the model that we have, favouring big business over perhaps the small farmer, and the result I think just really has been truly detrimental. And I suppose I feel very lucky to have been reared by my mum and to have learned about these things. And also she was an organic farmer. So we always had kind of an awareness about the environment and different things. But also I think with the term organic, it can sometimes put people off actually. And there's a lot of negative connotations, I think, within the industry and within the conversation around the use of the word organic and the feeling around that. And I have to say, and my mum would not like me saying this, but to a certain extent I understand, because I think a lot of people really associate an elitistness with the movement. And ultimately, what this comes down to is science. And of course, like in any group, you might have some people within the organic movement that if the whole country became organic, then maybe they become something else, so they could be the elitist 5%. But of course, the principles behind this are so important, and the vast majority of people who are farming organically are doing it because of the science behind it. And also, just to explain in very brief terms what that is, it's farming the way that our grandparents did. So it's nothing new. And I suppose when you look at how much agriculture changed in my short lifespan, when you look at it from when my granddad was farming and my mum growing up on that farm, it really has done a complete sea change. And I think it's important to know that when we're talking about changes happening now, because there's often a reluctance to even have this conversation. We can't talk about changes in agriculture. We need to keep the status quo, and any change will negatively reshape Irish agriculture. And this is seen as some kind of cliff edge for farmers. And never was this kind of depth of discussion and looking into science and best practice really talked about when all of those changes happened. So we can't make that mistake again either. This time we have to really look into the reasons for policy changes, the why, and the longevity and science-based nature of the decisions that we make. To give an overview, I suppose, of the major issues in farming, I suppose we have to look at intensive agriculture, like I said, leading to the loss of small family farms and the erosion of our biodiversity. At the moment, we're incentivized, really to clear land and to stock it heavily. And just to give an example of that, bringing it back to the farm, we have a Department of Fish that comes out to the farm every year and docks us payments where we have any kind of biodiversity, extra kind of land that we don't have cattle on it, where we have seed production, where we have vegetables growing. We get docked payments at the moment for those areas, and we only get paid for where we have cattle. So but ultimately we need to look at the fact that farmers are needing to do more and more for less and less. And we need to look at the false narratives around kind of farmers versus environmentalists. And I suppose, and to look at who's really benefited from this model so far. And I kind of touched on earlier, that has been big agri-business. It has been massively to the benefit of supermarkets and also to fertilizer companies. And just to explain the model of payments, just to give an overview of where the money from the department is going. So 33% of subsidies go to 1% of farms, and 80% of subsidies go to 20%. So it's quite literally rigged against small farms. And I think we've really seen the demise of that small Irish family farm. The majority of farms to be about 30 acres not that long ago. So then I suppose we need to look to develop a policy framework that enables farmers and producers to grow nutritious food for the people of Ireland, that protects the soil, water and the air quality, because the knock-on effects of this kind of intensive model and the increased application of chemicals has had an incredibly detrimental impact on particularly on our water quality. Soil degradation is a huge issue. And just to zoom out further for a second, the Food and Agriculture Organization warned recently that we'd only have about 60 harvests of food left to continue to degrade our soils at the rate that we are. And now I don't think that Ireland's in that position quite yet, although I don't have the data to say that. I think we're very lucky with our soil, and despite the kind of amount of chemical inputs on it, I'm sure, I hope that we have more than 60 harvests of food left. But when we look at a global scale, it's really important to preserve the soil, which is good quality, going into the future. And in practice, I suppose this means changes like looking at examining a basic income model for farmers. That might be something that needs to be looked at from a policy perspective. Currently, farmers have to chase a kind of patchwork of different and complex payments, with conditions and rates changing regularly, and they encourage a particular type of action. Like we see things like results-based agri-environmental pilot projects, things like REAP, and that kind of pays farmers to improve certain environmental things on their land. And there's merits there, for sure, but ultimately we need to kind of unify this, because pilot schemes, when you consider where we're at, isn't going to cut it. And sorry, Jen, I actually sort of zoomed out a bit further first, and that the reality of the broader situation is that we're very unique in a European context. 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions comes from our agriculture sector, and that's just a reality that we need to accept. And I think farmers deserve that respect, not to be kind of feeding them platitudes. We need to, respect the realities of this situation. In addition to maybe looking at the basic income and looking at the kind of payment scheme and those models, I don't think, when you consider the gravity and the reality of the situation we're in, pilot schemes and things like the GLOS scheme and the REAP scheme, although have their merits, it's not going to actually be effective enough. And ultimately, instead of having like the REAP scheme over here, the organic scheme over here, and the GLOS scheme over here, we need to have like a look at our whole country and the practices there, because I think that also creates the divide of environmentalists over here and chemical farmers over here. So we need to look at changing our overall policy, and there needs to be a lot of support in relation to that. One of those things is going to be limiting the use of chemical-based fertilizers, herbicides and pesticides. And I actually raised the issue of the rising fertilizer costs in the Dáil last week. We know that we have a huge dependency in Irish agriculture on these chemical applications, and we know that the cost is spiraling out of control. Cost of living has been a massive issue in recent weeks and months in politics, but ultimately for farmers, it's been another level. The cost of fertilizer has gone absolutely through the roof, and we need to ensure that we don't have so much of a dependency on it. And that's just aside from the environmental impact of those chemical fertilizers. And, important to highlight as well, there's lots of science around this. I remember I did my master's in horticulture a while ago, and for example, the use of red clover as a cover crop fixes more nitrogen than those chemical applications. So, in Ireland, we have an amazing model in terms of the Department of Agriculture, Teagasc being the advisory body for them. What we really need to look at is using that structure that's so well in place. We're a farming nation, we're good at that. And we have this really good structure. Things like when you attend a knowledge transfer scheme, and for somebody who doesn't know what that is or hasn't been to one, it's where farmers meet up in the same, so there might be a tillage one where all tillage farmers go and exchange information, and experts might come in and speak to you. You get that through your Teagasc advisor, which kind of advise you that that's available to you. There's a payment involved. So we have that structure there that we can be showing people now how to use those cover crops like red clover to, you know, as an alternative to those fertilizers. I'm just realizing I'm going over time, so I might stop. We need to look at things like, you know, plant wildlife corridors. Even recently in the law, there was an amendment to the Forestry Act that allows farmers to plant a small amount of trees without getting a license. I mean, it's a backlog in the forestry sector. Department of Agriculture has a lot to answer for. They're all things that we need to look at. We need to support fair prices. We're all waiting for this food ombudsman that's been promised, but what the Social Democrats have been advocating for is that we would have somebody who could actually ensure greater oversight, which the food ombudsman would do, but also be able to intervene and set laws, because, you know, there used to be things like a ban on below cost selling. That was to protect primary producers like farmers and to protect small retailers like butchers and smaller shops. And that law was actually repealed by the then Minister for Enterprise and Trade, Micheál Martin, and people like Mary Harney. That was that government that did that. So we need to ensure that that we do all of these things to protect farmers, but ultimately to look at the disastrous situation we've come into. And just to give one more example of it, this kind of always incentivizing one type of farming. We've seen, you know, not just the decimation of the small dairy farm and the small beef farm and a lot of the bigger beef farms, to be honest, as well. We used to have, you know, mixed farms where you grow a bit of tillage as well. We used to have way more people in tillage farming. And because that has been so kind of forgotten, and things like sheep farming as well, what we do now is we import all of that feed that we could be growing here from places like South America. And really we need to consider the carbon footprint of that as well when we're talking about carbon and our agriculture sector contributing to that, and how much more environmentally friendly it would be if we'd actually support our very good tillage sector and expand it and use that to feed the livestock that we have and stop overstocking. At this point, you know, we can't. And one of the things, and Jen, you probably remember, you know, around the time of COP26 and all that, we hear, you know, everyone speaking outside of both sides of their mouths. And I think really, like I said earlier, the farmers deserve more respect. I think it's high time politicians said what needed to be said instead of what they really think that people want to hear. And particularly in relation to agriculture, because we were accused of wanting to cull the national herd, which I remember just almost laughing at, because ultimately, if we don't take action, the herd will have to be culled, and nobody wants that. Whereas saying, look, we have to plan for a realistic future where we stop, you know, the increase and, you know, reduce the number starting now rather than having to actually ever cull a herd. But if we don't do something, that is ultimately will be the result. So it was a little bit ironic that that's what we were being accused of. But sorry, Jen, I've got overtime, so I'm going to stop now and I'll hand over and look forward to questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Holly. And you know, it's interesting because since becoming a TD and delving into this area, I'm on the committee for the climate committee. So we've done a lot of work on the carbon budgets and everything. So we've been looking, and I've been looking into the agriculture sector. I think it's clear, like, it doesn't seem to be working for anybody at the moment. It's not working for farmers, for rural communities, and it's not working for the environment. So there does have to be a shift in what happens. And I think you touched on it there, Holly, in relation to the basic income model. You know, like I was astounded when actually I did some research and I saw that, you know, the average farm income was 25,000, you know, and the majority of farmers have to have a job outside the farm in order to make a living. And that's just not sustainable, you know, and we're really not valuing farmers for what they contribute, I think. And I absolutely agree with what you're saying as well, in relation to respecting farmers. And like when we were having the discussions on the climate committee, and we know we have a big target to meet, you know, by 2030, 51%. And everyone is saying, well, we'll meet our renewable targets. We'll do it that way. It's going to be through technology. It's going to be through renewable energy targets. There's a huge risk that if the government puts all of its eggs in one basket as such, and that doesn't happen, the next sector that I think could achieve it quite quickly is the agriculture sector. And I think if it's done on a very quick basis, without any discussion, without any involvement of the farming community, without any real, I suppose, analysis being done, that I think it will actually be, you know, it won't be a good result, I think, for the farming community. So as you say, we need to be having those conversations now and planning for it, because things will change, you know, things are going to have to change, and they should change because they're not working for farmers at the moment. So how do we do it with farmers in a way that works for the farming community? And I think that's really what government should be doing. And as you say, they're at the moment that they don't seem to be brave enough to take that leadership role. So thank you very much for that, Hi. So next we're going to move on to Kate. Kate has a presentation she's going to go through with us. I see some questions are coming into the Q&A, so if anyone has any questions, lob them in there. And once when we hear from all our panelists, then we can start opening the floor to those questions.
Now, good evening, everyone. I have a PowerPoint, if someone could show it, please. This is me. I'm an organic farmer. My background is biochemistry. I'm also a social scientist, and I was appointed an EU expert in agricultural production and sustainability. I have to confess to being half a Yorkshire woman, so I'm full of practicality, and I believe for every problem there's a solution. So I married a farmer back 37 years ago, and for the last 25 years I've been farming the 66 acres, mainly dairy. There were 70 cows on the farm here then, and now I have 20 because I've diversified into pigs, fruit, veg, and the oats, and my oats were very successful on Twitter last year. I had a great crop from 7 acres, and this is all organically, so it can be done. And more recently, I've been involved with setting up a hemp co-op. And at EU level, I'm on a committee looking at hemp and flax and other medicinal plants, which I feel have great opportunity here in Ireland. I also make cheese, thanks to my mother, and I have a cheese business which I had put in abeyance for the last 5 years due to health reasons, but my cheese is now starting back into production this year because I'm involved in a European project looking at peatland soils in the world, so it's quite interesting. And as I say, there's always a solution to every problem. So the future is organic. We can't deny that because we live in a world of finite resources. There's only one planet, and we can't keep consuming the way we are and expect to carry on without real changes. As Einstein said, you can't solve our problems with the same thinking that created it. So my motto is less is more. So in dairy farming, I've gone from 70 cows to 20 cows. I use multi-species grasses with clover, and I've introduced hemp and flax as a rotational crop in my system, and it's working out very well because it's a short-term crop, so you can keep your cattle, you can keep your grass-based systems, but you produce this value-added crop, which I hope this year will actually start making money because there are facilities being built in Ireland. And I know the Irish grain growers are having a meeting tomorrow night about this. But if you go to the next slide, please. So I'll talk to you about hemp because this is very much my vision. And it kind of enthralls a lot of farmers. Before COVID, I used to find farmers wandering my fields, looking at my hemp crops, because they find it, it's kind of evocative of past, memories of hemp twine and all of that. And they understand what the crop is about. So it really suits all types of land, but it doesn't suit bog, raised bog or whatever, but it suits drained peatland. And we have a lot of drained peatland in Ireland, especially in the Midlands and on the Western Seaboard. And here on the Western Seaboard, the farms are small and we have a lot of rain, as I know tonight. So if you go to the next slide. This is what hemp does. It sequesters carbon at a tremendous rate, way better than forestry. And this is what people love about it. And it's only in the ground for 90 days. So, it's very easy to fit into every farming system, whether you're a tillage farmer, beef, sheep, dairy, whatever. And it's a great crop because it cleans the ground as well. We calculated with the Hemp Co-op, which I'm chair of, and we have over 150 members. That shows you the interest from farmers. And 217,000 hectares would reduce CO2 by 20%. And this assumes that it all goes into a carbon sink, which is, I'll explain more in a moment, insulation products, biocomposites. And at the moment, we're paying fines for not reaching our targets for carbon. And I have the link here for the cooperative. We've been in operation since 2018. And I think we're doing well. We're pushing on policy. We've been invited to present to the Oireachtas next week to the Agricultural Committee. And we've done a lot of work at European level, which I enjoy doing, speaking to the European Commission. And we work with the European Industrial Hemp Association. So if you go to the next slide. Now, this is the slide that always enthralls people. And I first presented this to the Commission back 3 years ago. And it is our answer to climate change because it's part of the circular bioeconomy. It provides us with everything we want. And this is why it was used so much. They say Henry Ford created his first car out of hemp. So if you look at the plant, it has the stalk, which is where all the carbon is locked up. So you can use that in building products and in paper and, in textiles and the geocomposites, the biocomposites. They're all, being researched madly now. I mean, there's such a demand for hemp in Europe. It's frightening. I presented at the European Industrial Hemp Conference in last June, and there was a presentation from China where they had these wonderful spinning mills for hemp and flax, and they're producing so many clothing products that are sold all over the world. And there's no reason why we can't invigorate our traditional industries in Ireland with a crop like this. And I like flax as well because it tends to grow better where I am because I'm very windswept and it's not as high as hemp. But as a food product and a technical product, it ticks all the boxes. And you can fuel a car with it. And it's used a lot in cosmetics and medicinal products. So the next slide, please. So this is my argument for farmers. You can maximize organic production by integrating this into the system, but you can also do that in a conventional farming system because it's a crop that doesn't need nitrogen. It's ideal for the organic system. It remediates land, so it cleans the land of chemicals. And that's very important because there's a buildup of chemicals like glyphosate, MCPA in our environment, which we don't want. MCPA is an endocrine disruptor. That means it goes into your cells and interferes with the DNA in your cells. So we have a crop that will give us everything we want. It's a 120-day growing cycle because I allow there for the fact that after 90 days you cut it and then you rest it in the field. That means you let it just lie down in the field and the bacteria start eating the gum on the outside of the stalk so it can be processed a lot more easily. And to me, that's very important. And it is a cash crop for farmers. We're working out the financial value. We're looking at a value per acre of between 300 and 800 euros per acre of a profit from a crop, just based on the stalk alone. That's where it's going for the shear and the fiber for hempcrete and building with it and the fibre for clothes and whatever. And, you know, if we add in the seed, there's a value for the seed that can be made into hemp oil, you know, for, what will I say, as a carrier for many things in the pharmaceutical industry, as a vegetable oil, the hemp seed, which can be used as an animal feed. So to me, it's a no-brainer. And then you have the leaf and the flower. And I've been to Europe to look at biorefineries. I mean, that's what we need in Ireland. And we had a project here called Biorefinery Gloss. It was an EIP Agri project where they were actually putting grass into a biorefinery. And then they know my feelings on that grass shouldn't go into a biorefinery. It's hemp that should be going in. And they've done this in Holland. And the biorefinery will separate out the oil, the protein, and the sugars, and they can all be used. Nothing is wasted. And you end up with a cake that can be put into silage as an additive for towels. So to me, it's the ideal cash crop for farmers. They're not having to plant their land in trees. And they're, you know, as I said before, they're enthralled about it. But the whole problem with our government up to now is that it's not in policy in Ireland. And the Hemp Co-op has done a huge document to the Department of Agriculture on hemp, giving all our cogent arguments for it. And next week we'll present them to the Agricultural Committee. And I hope before long that we'll have grant aid. And in the new CAP, the Department of Agriculture actually put in for TAMs, you know, equipment for the bioeconomy for farmers. And that's what we want, because at the moment, the agronomy side of the business is very difficult for small farmers. Big farmers have no problem because they have the machinery already, but we need small machines capable of going into small fields. And we've designed them, but we can't get funding because the government will not fund it at the moment. But as I said, I think that will be gone within 12 months. So my next slide. This is my favourite quote I take everywhere from Brendan Kennelly, who came from the village near me, which is a village which has died on its feet. It once had 7 bakeries and a harbour and a corn mill, and now it has virtually nothing but a supermarket. And, you know, we need to invigorate our rural areas again. We need a just transition. And to me, hemp is very much part of that just transition. And I hope that the Social Democrats will recognise that. And indeed, every farmer will embrace it, because if we can get the government to give us the carbon credits for hemp, and there's a very good argument for that, and it's been looked at European level, it will mean that farmers can reduce the number of cattle they have. And a lot of farmers have too many cattle because they're on the treadmill of trying to make enough money. So if we can offer them a crop and that they get their carbon credits as well as the cash from the crop, and they can reduce their cattle, it's going to be a win-win-win for everyone. And I think that's everything. My voice is going. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was really interesting. I think we're probably going to, I think there'll be a lot of questions generated about that. What I find interesting is when we're talking about the future farming, sometimes it is about looking to the past, isn't it? And learning from how things were done before, and things that were, you know, different crops or different ways of farming from years ago. And I think sometimes we forget that we knew better a number of years ago. That we sort of, I think particularly government policy, as you say, has pushed farmers onto a treadmill that's very difficult to get off without supports from government, and we just need to make sure that those supports are provided. So that's really, really interesting. Thank you so much for that. We're going to move on to Rob next. So Rob, if you want to unmute yourself there, and then afterwards, then we'll get into the questions. And if anyone does have any questions on Kate's hemp idea or what Rob's about to go through with us now, just put it into the questions and answers or into the chat.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. First of all, yeah, big thanks for the opportunity to speak. And I suppose, you know, two great speakers there already, and a lot of similar themes coming up. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to give a brief kind of overview of what's going on here at home on this farm. I'm going to tell you about where the information is coming from on conservation and regenerative agriculture that we're very interested in through Base Ireland. And then towards the end, I'm going to maybe speak a little bit about my own views on policy in the future, which is the subject of the talk. And if I might ask Jennifer to give me a little prompt, maybe 2 minutes from the end, because tendency to wander maybe a small bit. And we're short on time, so I might skip through some of this. And if there is interest in any of these topics, you know, fire on the questions, and I'm happy to delve into these things if I can, because I'm by no means an expert, but I'll tell you what I can tell you. So the first thing is, you know, we're here in North Cork, myself and my dad, and we're mostly a tillage farm. We grow a lot of crops, and we have some cattle and sheep as well. So that mixed farming thing really, you know, resonated with me. I think that older farming of sort of a more cyclical farming where, you know, nutrients went around and rotation of animals and rotation of crops, it all, you know, sort of, you know, definitely makes a lot of sense to me in a natural kind of a way when you think about farming and how it should be. If there is actually a specific way to farm, we're also different. My dad has always been a little bit different in his own way in terms of making up his own mind and using his own, you know, senses and his own sort of mind to make decisions. And what he did 20 years ago was he gave up ploughing completely and he went to a minimum tillage system, which was a great step forward for our farm. There was a bit of a roller coaster in learning and trying to figure it out. No internet, no open source information. There were discussion groups at the time, and you know, some peers of mine and some great farmers, we still meet together actually in discussion groups from a long time ago. Second and third generation guys still trying to tease out stuff. You know, farming is constantly changing, there's constantly problems. And I'm very appreciative of all the people who've given me information, their own information, hard fought, and their own experience in Base Ireland, my current discussion group, and in, you know, previous discussion groups that I've been in. So that change to the minimum tillage was based on a huge interest in the soil. That has always been digging holes, and he taught me how to do it. And we would smell the soil, we would get our hands in the soil, and we would sort of dig into it. There was a great speaker we heard speak 2 or 3 years ago, Hugh Lovell, and he said in his talk that he's passed away since actually, observation is the key to intelligence. And I thought an awful long time about that. And what he was getting at is that you can't really make up your mind or use your brain until you actually take in and see what you see. So the start of all our farming really does start with our main resource, our soil. And I'm going to talk about soil an awful lot, and you'll be sick of hearing me talk about soil by the end of this. Because really that is our asset. That's what all our fancy sheds and our machinery and our cattle and everything else in farming is based on, that topsoil. And if we get that right, that's the foundation of everything here. And I think that's been the story of our farm up until now anyway. So I think what I'm going through myself personally is something that everybody in Ireland, and maybe some more than others, have gone through in more recent times. There's an environmental awareness rising in everybody, and I think it's great to see it. And I think that, you know, it's even stronger maybe in younger generations. And I think that, you know, all industries will respond to that, and farming is no different. There is a tendency, and it was mentioned already, that farmers are afraid of this, and that we are afraid, because I think, you know, we would be very conscious of there used to be just output and a family and an income. Those were the two main things that farmers were sort of, you know, the goals of farming. But now there's a third one. We have to try and find the balance between the environment and food production and farmers' income. And somewhere in there, I'm very positive and I'm absolutely adamant that it can be done. But it's going to take an awful lot of discussion, an awful lot of coming together, and an awful lot of listening to the other side. I think that there's probably, you know, a tradition, maybe it's developed in the world in general, that people tend to say their point of view as loud as they can, and then when it's time to listen to other people, to kind of, you know, see where other people are coming from, I think maybe that's a bit lacking. So that brings me on to Base Ireland. I joined about 2016, and it's more or less a discussion group. Like-minded farmers, forward-thinking farmers who are sort of, I suppose, trying to change. Change is a word that has been said an awful lot this evening already, and my own views on change. Change is disruptive, and change normally happens from necessity. It doesn't just happen for the sake of it. And I think we're at that point where it is necessary to change, and it's forcing change. And when it comes to the likes of what we're talking about, you know, change is coming, whether we like it or not. Europe and policy is changing. And I think, you know, we would all do better to sort of maybe, you know, embrace it and sort of, you know, enter discussions and play our part, instead of just feeling like, just leave us alone and we know what we're doing. is a hard line to sort of, you know, to find where it even happens on our own farm here. My poor dad listening to me coming along, telling him all these new things that we're going to change, arguing in the kitchen over things. And he's been farming his whole life, 50, 55 years. And here's change and this new stuff. Now, he's brilliant, and he take it on board an awful lot. But, you know, having the open-mindedness to say, okay, you know, most industries in the world are looking to say, how can we do this better? How can we improve? And farmers do tend to be a bit, we'll do this now, we know what we're doing, and leave us alone. And I think, you know, you get nowhere in life without being a little bit stubborn, a little bit single-minded, but somewhere in there is progress, and finding that can be difficult on a personal level, and then to try and do it at a national level, you know, when it comes to interacting with policy and everybody else. So we often hear the goals and the targets, and we have a little bit of an in-joke in the discussion group and base, where it's often said on the in the DAL and stuff, you know, ambitious targets are great and big goals, and everybody feels great about them. But what's maybe missing in there sometimes is how. Because, you know, you can set whatever goal you want, you can make it sky high, it's great, but the actual how is maybe what's missing in some of these conversations. So what I feel is that there's little bits of that how in what we're doing in Base Ireland, and I think it's an ever-changing thing. How it started, I suppose, was guys on the internet, guys listening to other speakers abroad. This has developed an awful lot in America and France, and Base actually, we've traveled to a lot of these places, and we've gone to speak to these farmers, and we've been to a lot of seminars to try and bring some of this back to get our own interpretation of it for Irish soils, Irish weather, Irish conditions, and Irish markets, in terms of how it fits into our current agriculture system. The measures we're talking about are all based around three basic pillars, which is the soil cover, to keep your soil protected and to keep your soil protected from the elements. There's a suggestion that in nature you rarely see bare soil. Soil isn't supposed to be exposed to raindrops, the destructive elements that would damage the structure of soil. Soil isn't supposed to be exposed to sunlight. If you have no protection on soil in arid climates, you know, you get deserts more or less. So keeping soil covered is the first thing. The second thing is trying not to disturb soil. When it comes to tillage, you know, there's a huge amount of discussion in farming, conventional farming, and even in our own group, we're trying to be no-till farmers to as much as possible as we can. That is, in my farm, happening slowly, but there's definitely a sort of a learning period and a transition. So at the moment, we would say we use tillage as much as necessary, but as little as possible. And that's kind of where we're at the moment in that evolution towards no-till. And the suggestion there would be that as you don't disturb soil, you're letting that structure build naturally. You're using roots and plants to create that structure, and you're trying to protect it, because if you keep tearing it asunder and bringing it back to zero, a lot of the microbiology in the soil and a lot of the air pockets get crumbled and crushed. So you're trying to create an environment where soil can be alive, and there's lots of would say the soil food web is something that's definitely worth Googling. You'll read an awful lot about how those interactions and what it links into storing nutrients. So we're trying to create these alive soils that are both a sink and a source. And what I mean by that is when there's times of abundance in terms of rain or even nutrient, that there's a sink to put them in, to take them in. And then when I beg your pardon, when there's times of abundance, there's a place for it to go. And then when there's scarcity, they can become a source and give it back. So you're increasing the holding capacity of your soil in lots of ways. The third one is diversity. If you look to nature and how, you know, our world evolved before we came along, sort of inflicting farming on it, you always see multi-species everything. You rarely see a monoculture, and the thinking of, you know, roots love other roots. Some plants go deep, some plants go shallow, some forage phosphorus, some forage potassium, and there's great symbiosis between them, so they can actually do better together. So we're trying to capture some of that in our own farming methods, and that's the basis of what this is based on, you know. The measures themselves, I'll just skip through here because, you know, we probably talk for 20 minutes in any one of these. I'm by no means an expert. There's guys in the group way further along some of these. And I suppose how we are at the moment is you sort of pick and choose the one that suits yourself the most. And I suppose over time you're exposed to guys trying something else. And I know at the beginning stuff was too much for me, different elements of it. And now as time has gone by, I'm becoming sort of more open to it. And as I've maybe changed a lot initially and tried to get that working, settle down to a period of kind of maybe stability, and then maybe trying to change a little bit more. I think Jennifer already mentioned that the rate of change is very important. How suddenly things change, giving yourself a chance to learn and adapt, and changing for the sake of changing. It's kind of maybe delicate, because let's not forget, as we're asking farmers to change and as we're changing ourselves and we want to change, our livelihoods hang in the balance. So there has to be that balance found there in the middle. Balance is a big word all the time, keep using it over and over. No-till is the first one. You know, allowing the fungal element of soils to build. we don't even ever talk in conventional agriculture about the fungus element of soil. It's nearly all bacteria dominated. So if we can stop tilling our soils, those fungal hyphae and the communication actually network, the internet of the soil, can start to develop. Cover crops is a huge part of what we do here. We actually have a 10 species mix at the moment. After our winter barley is cut, we try and get the bales off as quick as possible, and we try and get on with a cover crop. We're in Cork, we get a good bit of sunshine, often a damp wet harvest too, which actually helps our cover crops grow in abundance. That brings in another element of diversity into the system, which is trying to get animals back onto the cropland. We would graze our cover crops over the winter, and we would even graze some of our cash crops as well, which is something we're just tinkering with, because those are our cash crops. We rely on those for our income. So multi-species sports, the grassland farmers in the group are really, really good at that. And that is just maybe a more efficient use of the nutrients, and trying to get away from this monoculture of ryegrass that loves nitrogen, which is the basis of an awful lot of Irish farming. Compost, we compost all the organic manure we get in here. And I suppose, organic manures are great. They're better than artificial fertilizers, but we've been to great guy Jim Cronin and there's actually more than him. There's loads of guys in the group who know an awful lot about this composting, and you're trying to make those raw nutrients into more of a ready-made meal for the soil, and trying to get some biological activity into them so that you can add that to the land. Wildflowers and reductions of aphicide to collect pollinators. There's risk in all that, especially the aphicide one, but guys have seen great progress, and there's a suggestion in a lot of these measures that the farmers can be ahead of the research, because a lot of change, disruptive change, new change, it doesn't usually come from, say, big bodies and big government organizations. A lot of it is grassroots and comes from the ground up, and that's what's happened in other countries, and that's where a lot of this is coming from. So there is, genuinely good information that is, and we are actually lacking data. We are farmers, we're not universities, we're not scientists. So we're trying to gather data, and we're trying to put numbers around a lot of this stuff, because the anecdotal evidence to the positives is massive. So that's the next thing that's going to develop for us as a group. I think we'll have to link together with a few people that will come in. I know there's a great guy, Soren Ilso in Denmark, who's heavily linked to Copenhagen University, and he gets a lot of students out to start measuring what he's doing, because he's doing the farming and he's seeing what's worked, and now he's getting numbers around it. And there's a lot of that happening in a lot of other countries, and we're a bit behind here. We're a voluntary organization. We don't get any funding from anybody. So it's happening, but it's slow progress and a lot of enthusiasm. All by soil balancing would be trying to get away from the NPK system, which is a very simple system, in something that's a very complicated thing, which is crop nutrition and soils. There's a lack of magnesium in our soils in general where we are. I think there's a lack of magnesium in food, and often in human beings as well. It sort of goes all the way up along. We would be saying all the time that healthy soils is healthy plants and animals, which is healthy human beings. I've a bit of an issue with the cheap food policy in Europe. I don't think cheap food is a good thing. I think it's actually, no, I'm biased because I'm a farmer. Maybe we can speak a little about this at the end, because I'm certain I'm behind. So some of the stuff that I'm getting towards in time, there's guys who companion crop. They don't grow monocultures in their cash crops. They mix beans with oats. They mix clovers. There's a couple of guys who actually have permanent clover understories that they keep planting into again and again and again, trying to get reasonable yield from a much lower input system. I suppose if we can just make the same money, but be environmentally way better off, we'd all be happy, And even some guys will be prepared to make slightly less, but that's a personal choice. Now, I don't know how policy can link into that to sort of say, look, if you can produce enough with, the problem we all have is that the economic value on nature is zero. And if you're looking at pure economics, you don't value the air and you don't value the water. And that's something that I think policy should start to factor in. Even if you were to say the price of, concrete or anything like that, if you were to say the price is X at the moment, but plus the environmental tag in it, you'd automatically sway people towards more environmentally friendly things. When Kate spoke well about hemp there, we were actually at a farmer's place in England, and he showed us all his farm was great, and we went for tea in his house, and he said, all that extension there is hempcrete. And it was gorgeous and it was perfect. And he said, yeah, it was a bit more expensive, but I was way happier doing it. So I was very encouraged to hear the likes of that coming into play. Foliar nutrition is more efficient use of our nutrition, to put it straight on the leaves of the plants instead of putting it onto soil, maybe losing some and getting some into the roots. I mean, it just makes an awful lot of sense, and putting carbon sources in with that, so that it's kind of more bound, and so that the plant kind of is more naturally able to take it in. Korean natural farming, with a couple of guys in the group looking at a lot of stuff. Biostimulants, homemade biostimulants that you don't get any money. There's guys brewing bacillus bacteria to try and use them as a fungicide instead of the chemical fungicides we used. Biological seed dressings, some very good ones that you can do. That lads are seeing side-by-side comparisons in the field, and it's actually dramatic differences. Very encouraging stuff. Wormeries, actually, we're all a bit obsessed with worms. They're a great signal that you're doing stuff that right in the soil, but you can actually have a wormery, and you can actually use the leachate from it as a biostimulant. All of those elements there, very, very briefly skipped over, are giving us cleaner water, less runoff and leaching. They're actually sequestering. If we get some of this stuff right, our cover crops are protecting our soils, not to be moving them around too much to oxidize everything, or actually we can start sequestering carbon. It was something missing from the beginning of the conversation when emissions were mentioned. Emissions came from fossil fuels, and that's how you measure the climate damage, by emissions. But if you have a system that can actually also put carbon into the ground, that doesn't fit that model. So when you talk about farming being a third of agricultural emissions, where is the measuring of what goes into the ground from all the growing crops, from all the good practices? And if that's missing from the sum, very few other industries can offer it, and there's nobody going to make any money out of it except the farmers. So it would be great to see that develop, to see that we could actually sequester, we could actually help. Nobody's talking about putting carbon back in the ground. It's a very difficult thing. Biological life is how all the carbon got into the soil. That's what created the fossil fuels, whether it's living plants or living sea creatures, or whether it's soils like bogs and plants decaying over time. This is how the carbon got in there in the first place. So there's elements of this to put it back in again. So the knowledge in the group and the transferring of it between farmer to farmers is powerful. It's helped me an awful lot. Huge amount of gratitude for the honesty people have given me in their own successes and failures, you know, an open chat about what goes wrong and what goes right. And I suppose the data side of it needs help. We're farming, we're not mining, you know, we can't just move on to another farm afterwards. So it has to be cyclical, it has to be minded. I think that's a great kind of maybe summation of what goes on. If I can skip ahead quickly there to the future of farming, which I think is what the talk's about. I would say that, you know, the current situation is a difficult one because, you know, we have great young guys and girls coming out of ag college universities, and to go to the farm is actually taking a pay cut. You know, it's not a financial decision to go farming. It's one of love, and it's one of tradition, and it's one of you love where you come from and you care a lot about it. And it shouldn't have to be that, you know, it should stand on its own 2 feet, along with all the great jobs that are in Cork City or in Dublin or anywhere else. As those industries are developing and moving, and there's good money and there's good incomes and the cost of living rises accordingly, farming genuinely should be, I think, more important than anything because it's our food. But again, I'm biased. So over time, you know, when we start, you know, maybe developing these new systems, I think it's very exciting for young people. And a lot of the calls that we would get in base from researchers in college doing their PhDs and doing their dissertations, they'd be asking about cover crops. They'd be talking like they're a member of the group, and they'd be saying, where are you getting this information? And it does seem to have a kind of a more exciting feel to it, that it's farming, you know, with a positive future. I think all those things that I mentioned earlier on, I can say right now, if the farm is going okay, fine, but hopefully in 4 or 5 years' time, it's going to improve slightly and it's going to be better. And when I said conservation agriculture and regenerative agriculture, regenerating the soils is what it's about. So hopefully there's a brighter future. Then on policy. So I mentioned there used to be 100% production and output, and now there's an environmental element. The coming together of the discussion in terms of farmers, environmentalists, politicians, and the members of the public, they're absolutely involved in all of this too. I think that's a conversation that doesn't happen easily, and there's no forum for that. We see the guys protesting today, you know, they don't want to be there. They don't want to be upsetting people's days, no more than the people want to be upset by them, but there's no choice, you know. And I suppose in those situations, I'd be saying, you know, if you're going to go up to them, say, lads, is it really that bad? You know, what's it like? And I think that coming together, even in different opinions, say Kate's an organic farmer now and I'm not, but I'd love a conversation where we've some great organic farmers in the group. Actually, we've learned an awful lot from them, to sort of say, look, where are you coming from? And I think when you start sharing your perspectives, you have great hope for sort of building relationships. And if you're going to put ag policy on farmers and you haven't consulted them enough, then it's no wonder that they're going to push back against it. You know what I mean? No, that's not saying that we shouldn't change. And a lot of the time it's just leave us alone and let us farm. Embracing change, if it's good change and if it's for the right reasons. We're definitely worried about well-meaning policy from people who know bits and pieces about it coming down the road that actually maybe doesn't deliver environmentally and actually has penalties for no real reason on farmers. Farmers do feel like they're maybe singled out a little bit and maybe, you know, spoken an awful lot negatively and very rarely positively in the media. Consumers have a lot, I think in recent times, real strong opinions about food and where food should come from. And I think that's brilliant. Passion, you know, is needed in all areas to make progress. But when it comes to paying for, you know, better food, then maybe a lot of people don't have the choice to just go and buy the cheap food. It's a difficult world, and you mentioned inflation at the moment is serious, and farms are serious for everybody. But somewhere in there is a fair price for good food. I think Ireland is the second lowest in Europe in terms of their percentage household spending on food. You know, that to me, you know, says an awful lot about how we view food, how we value farming, and how we value the whole thing in general in society. So I'm nearly there. So I'll just maybe finish up on a few others. yeah, I mentioned how fast we change and you know, how disruptive it can be. So if it's too sudden, it's too abrupt, and we ban too many things quickly without alternatives, the shame is, like, this is how we know how to farm in our current system, in our conventional system, with these inputs that we use. Holly mentioned fertilizer, and, you know, I think Kate mentioned glyphosate. Now, it's a bit saying, if you don't like those and you want to ban them, or if you want to change them, it's like saying diesel, you know, to give somebody maybe the understanding from where they're coming from. I don't like diesel, I don't like petrol, but I'm afraid, you know, the whole world is married to it for the moment. So if we're going to find change, it can't be too sudden, where suddenly you have huge amounts of people, you know, struggling to go about their business or their lives. So it does need to be careful change, and it needs to be in the right direction, well consulted. And I think on the public opinion one, it's a great thing to look up and Google the other side to your own argument. I think that is something that I'm talking about. Do I do it? Can I do it? In base, we would thrash things out an awful lot, and rarely do we have a nice rosy kind of, it's all summed up in one, because life isn't really like that. You are forced to maybe listen to somebody who you disagree with, have respect for people and their opinions, even if they're different to yours. Again, it comes back to, you know, finding the common ground so that we can all kind of make progress and do a bit better. I have mentioned the fine line between production, farmers' incomes, and the environment, and I think that's there to be found. What should we change? You know, the future of farming, people love technology, and people love talking about technology as the future. It has its role, and it will make things maybe more precise and more accurate, but I really believe the future is probably similar to what you guys said already, that it's in the past. Go back to what I said at the beginning, all those methods and more, and as they develop, and there's more and more and more as we go down these roads. I think it's one that will develop further and further. I'm probably well over my 10 minutes there, Jennifer, so thanks again. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Rob. That was really interesting. And I think probably like the way I think you've summed it up when you said careful change. I think that's so important, you know, that it can't be something that's just forced on people without any preparation, without any discussion, without any listening. And I suppose that's a conversation myself and Holly have had quite a lot, is, you know, how do we get these conversations started? You know, we sort of have a fear that it will be an abrupt change. That's not going to be good for anyone. So I suppose this talk is probably the starting point for us when it comes to that listening piece. You know, what I found very interesting as well with both yourself and Kate, that you're in a little group already. So you've sort of found you've a little grassroots group yourselves, and then how do we translate that into more of a national piece? You know, you're doing the work on the ground, you're working with others, learning from others, listening to others. How do we make that, you know, as you say, more solid by getting the data and getting the evidence, and then translating it into national policy, as opposed to national policy coming in on top of you and saying, this is what we want you to do, you know? So it was really, really interesting. As we have so many questions, which is brilliant. I just don't know how we're going to get through them all. Okay, so I'm going to start. What I'll do is, I think I'll throw out a question for each of you. So I'll put out 3 questions and see which ones came in first. Holly, for you, the Thomas asked, what's our position on 100% convergence? And then let me see, we also have questions in relation to, Shane actually said that hemp, Kate, is used as an enrichment on Irish pig farms, as it's a natural product which meets all the requirements the pigs can chew and investigate it. So it seems it's already a sort of, maybe not mainstream, but it's already been used. So let me see, in relation to the hemp questions, someone else has said, my biggest concern about hemp will be its connotations with cannabis. However mistaken, there could be a few people less in favor of hemp than me. If it could be imposed on us from a European level, I think it might be more passable, and that some TDs would find it difficult to support anything to do with hemp. I think in relation, I think it comes down to education as well, that it's important to have those discussions. A couple of people have picked up on this, Kate, in relation to your drained peatlands to grow hemp, that the drained peatlands would hold a lot more as carbon sinks if they're re-wetted. So perhaps if you could just talk to that piece, and then Rob, I'll see if there are any questions come in specifically.
I'll take the IFA one if you want. That's a nice awkward one there.
IFA, okay, so you can see them as well. Okay, perfect. Which IFA one was that? Was that in relation to who it represents?
As a man said, that the question is, what engagement has there been with the likes of the IFA?
Perfect, excellent.
Sorry, maybe Holly would like to go there. I just spotted it.
No, just to add to that, I meet with the IFA annually, things like, just in terms of, say, party engagement, in case that's the question, and then go ahead, Rob. Yeah.
I was just going to say, from a farmer's point of view, people look to the IFA, and the IFA do represent farmers. But the thing about farmers is we don't have a union, you know, as the price of everything is going up in the world and inflation and small businesses are getting squeezed in their costs, they can hopefully pass that on to their customers to share it, you know. Whereas the farmer, he's a price taker. He buys everything at retail price. He sells everything at wholesale price. So, you know, we're at the mercy of the world commodity markets, and we're at the mercy of the weather as well. So when it comes to farmers, the IFA really are the only people that we can to stand up for ourselves, or to kind of come together and have a voice, because otherwise we would sort of just have nowhere to go. So I think looking to them for you know, farming techniques and environmental, like they're there to stand up for us, to make sure that people don't come too heavy-handed, you know, on farming incomes while they're trying to do the right thing environmentally, which there's nothing wrong with. But again, very few people or voters are farmers nowadays. You know, it's mostly urban populations, most people in towns and that. So to sort of say, oh, fix the countryside, and to have those solutions out in the countryside is very tempting, maybe, to say that once those people sort that, you know, there's kind of a, you know, there's a sort of an easy maybe way to sort of justify that's where the problem is and fix it out there. And I think the IFA are there to sort of say, look, it's not as simple as that. And I think they're not really maybe there for environmental direction, but they're definitely there to protect farmers' livelihoods. So maybe it's the wrong place to be looking for environmental leadership and engagement, you know.
Okay, excellent. And Katie, could you just answer that piece then in relation to the hemp, and are there other soils that hemp would grow on other than you know, drained peatland?
I'd like to add on something there, that, you know, the IFA, you know, they do their job, but they don't look after the small farmer. And this is where the agricultural cooperative needs to come back into its own. And there's a consultation out at the moment on reform of legislation for the cooperative, which I happen to be doing this week. But, you know, the cooperative model was always enjoyed by farmers. And that is why our hemp cooperative is really kind of making waves now, both at, you know, at national level and European level. And that's important because we're influencing policy at European level. We don't need the IFA to help us now, because we feed directly into policy. And I think farmers have forgotten they've got that power if they come together. But going back to the hemp, peatland is very difficult. You have raised peatland, and a lot of it, you know, is destroyed from turf cutting. We have a lot of midland peatlands where they need to be re-wetted because they've never been used for agricultural use. But where I live on the Shannon Estuary, it's a huge swathe of peatland: North Kerry, East Kerry, North Cork, West Clare. You know, I think the Greek astronomer called us the people of the water, the Luceni, because we're always wet here. So we're drained peatlands. We created Kerry Co-op by farming these drained peatlands. And the bog commissioners identified this area for growing hemp and flax 200 years ago. So it's quite logical. I mean, I was at the peatlands gathering a couple of months ago, where I heard policy people suggesting that farmers should not be given any cap payments in peatlands, and the peatlands should be re-wetted. Now that was scandalous, and I made comments, but no one answered them. But, you know, I live in a wonderful farming community that created a lot of great storytellers and created Kerry Co-op. These farmers need a just transition away from intensive agriculture. And to me, hemp and flax will do that. And we wean them off the cattle. And by their very nature, they're becoming wetter, and they're going to be re-wetted by Mother Nature. You know, I could talk about this for hours, of what they've done to North Kerry in terms of, you know, 400 wind turbines of concrete going into our peatlands, raising the water table. So farming has become very difficult. But I think we have to bring farmers along with us. And I have elderly farmers that come to my door, and they love the idea of hemp. They have their children all across the world, and they want to bring them home. But they won't come home for the drudgery of dairy and beef and, you know, sheep farming. I mean, my cows start calving in 2 weeks, and you know, I've had 3 months of a hibernation period, and then it'll be just work all day long and all night long sometimes. They don't want that, these young people. They want something that can change the world, and that's what hemp will do. And, you know, Shane is right, you know, it's used in pig feed. All over the world, it's used as an animal feed additive because it has 30% protein. It has a lot of the omega oils in it. But if you put it through a biorefinery, you can actually take oils out of the leaf and flower. I mean, it's quite enthralling what hemp does. And that's why it gives such a vibrant message to farmers. But, you know, hemp is going to be allowed to be paid in the organic farming in the new CAP. Cooperatives will receive funding in the new CAP. You know, the European Commission have agreed that. DG Agri have promised a push in hemp for Northern Europe, because I pointed out that Northern Europe was being very conservative, and someone expresses concern there about, you know, people don't like the fact that it's called cannabis sativa. That's the word, that's where the word canvas comes from. It's a, you know, an amalgamation of cannabis sativa is canvas. So, you know, we need to educate people, as you say, and it's happening. I have TDs coming to me all the time. I've been asked by Donegal County Council to talk to the farmers in Donegal. I talk to groups of farmers anywhere, and that's how we spread the word. And I don't think there'll be a problem, because it will help our housing industry. There's a lot of people doing up old buildings, and you can do them up with hempcrete and bring them to a top BER rating. And Sustainable Energy Ireland will now permit you to use hempcrete blocks that are made in Belgium by is it Isohemp or Hemp Flax, I've forgotten. But we should have that in Ireland. And there's no reason why we can't have it. And we should have a biorefinery, and we should have an anaerobic digester. We shouldn't be wasting anything. It's all part of the circular bioeconomy, and it will save our farmers and save our environment. And I'll get off my soapbox there.
Thank you. And you know, it's one of the things I think that frustrates me most is that we don't look to other countries and learn from them. You know, we want to sort of really make our own mistakes, which, you know, I think is we don't have time for that. Holly, can you answer the question just in relation to the convergence? So there's two questions I'll put to you. So the first was, what's our position on 100% convergence? And the second then is from Anya, and it's, what's your definition of intensive farming? How many livestock units?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And really good questions. Thank you for putting them in. I suppose just for some people might not know what convergence is, it's an established process to redistribute and flatten the value of CAP payment entitlements. So it means that all farms, regardless of their size or historical entitlements, crucially in Ireland, receive the same basic payment entitlement per hectare. So it is kind of often a bone of contention in farming communities. And you know, worth noting that, for example, the IFA are not in favour of it. It argues that it risks more farms becoming unviable. But I suppose the majority of farmers probably would gain from convergence, and it's important to note that farmers with lower entitlement values would see a substantial rise in their payments over the period, and that's according to the new convergence modelling exercise carried out by the Department of Agriculture here. And so we are, as a party, in favour of convergence, even though I know it is bone of contention. Like I said, I think it's good to be honest and say what you think, rather than try and just faff around it and not give a straight answer. And, you know, I suppose it's easy to say these things without, you know, we have to look at the bigger picture. And actually, I suppose I'll tie that into the question around what is intensive farming. And, you know, thank you for that question, because I think we do need to be specific, and that is kind of tricky as well. So I suppose just say in the context of where we're at in terms of farming at the moment, the amount of land in use, I would say probably around 1 livestock unit to the hectare. But of course, it depends how much of our land is in, livestock farming, how much of that is dairy, how much of that is beef. There's all these different varying things. But to give a specific answer, I would say that 1 livestock unit. But it's also dependent on what other things are going on in terms of sequestering carbon, where we're at in terms of the other science around the use of seaweed and different things like that. So I can't be more specific than that, but if I had to give a number, that is probably what I'd say. And it's the same with convergence. Like if people's payments are changing, they're getting less payments in terms of that, then of course we need, and if people have to then perhaps have less livestock units on the farm, that has to be cushioned with better prices for product. We can't just say, now you have less. That's really not what we're getting at. And I think that's the purpose of having these discussions. And I think that's why I think those questions are really important. And I'm glad people are putting them in, because ultimately what we need is proper consultation with communities in terms of this. So I suppose where we're coming from, what we're saying is, we know we have changes to make, and how do we do that in a way that's fair? Not just make those changes without any thought or consideration, and also with consideration for the fact that, it is our farmers are our most important professionals. It's the most important occupation. Food is the most important thing that we need. And I think we really learned that in the pandemic. And I wish that we kind of learned the lesson more, that really all we needed was to go and get food when things were, tough. So it's really about making sure we do this in a fair way. And I suppose what we're saying is, we acknowledge that things have to change. And instead of waiting till it gets to a point where we have to change suddenly, and without that thought and care put into what happens when we reduce livestock units to the hectare, that we've actually planned for that and made sure that, I think we hear terms like just transition now. It's almost become like a word like sustainable agriculture. It almost means nothing. But I suppose what we mean is a fair transition. How do we do this in a fair way to ensure we produce enough food, and to ensure that we keep people on the land, and that it's, fair to the next generation as well? There's actually something there for them to farm.
Okay, thank you. And just, I see there's another question, and I think we might have answered this one, Sean, and it's in relation to reducing animal agriculture by eating less meat. So I think, Holly, you covered that. It's about sort of paying better for quality product, so that we may be producing less, but actually that the farmers will still get paid sufficiently, so that they can have a livelihood on the land.
Absolutely, yeah. Price for product. I mentioned that before, that we used to have a law that prevented below cost selling to protect primary producers like farmers and small retailers like butchers. And I suppose in terms of how much meat can and can't we eat, that's something we have to look at a big global picture on that. And at the moment, I mean, we produce so much meat in Ireland, and we produce very, very little in the way of other food like fruit, veg, grain. So, it's not like we're in a position at the moment where we need to put a cap on the meat that we're eating. There's no carbon, import factor to that. But like, we're looking at the bigger picture as a globe, we probably do have to eat less meat and eat more in the way of vegetables. And I think something we didn't really get to touch on there is the potential for a better horticulture and tillage sector in Ireland. And at present we're actually a net calorie importer in terms of how much we import in terms of our fruit and veg and our grain and our feed for our cattle. And there's huge potential for us to do more in that area. To give one example just briefly, Jen, there's Holland is the second largest producer of vegetables in the world after the United States of America. And of course, Holland's tiny, it's a smaller country than Ireland, and we actually have favourable growing conditions in terms of our climate and our soil quality. So there's huge potential for us to create a market there, and I think we're so lucky to have that green brand that we have, particularly in organic horticulture. We could really be growing a market in that, and also reducing the carbon impact of importing all of our fruit and veg like we do at the moment. So loads and loads of potential there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And come in there just very briefly, Jennifer.
Yeah, work away, Rob.
Very interested in those points. I suppose when Holly was speaking about the Common Agricultural Policy, I think when that was kind of invented as an idea, it was very much around production. I think production was what was supported. And if that's not what it's for anymore, then we do need to decide what is it for. Is it just a support for somebody who is a farmer, sort of like Farmer Dole or something like that, and everybody gets the same share? Is it linked to how much you're going to produce if food is now plentiful, because we grow lots of it now and technology has cut up? People feel like there's plenty of food, so we don't have to maybe say it's about production anymore. And maybe COVID did show us that maybe food isn't as solid as we all just take for granted, that there was times there where suddenly all of a sudden there wasn't just food. People do tend to think it comes from the supermarket, and it genuinely doesn't. And then the third part is, in terms of, the environmental, if it's going to be an environmental payment, there's nothing to say that a small or big farm is or isn't environmentally friendly. You can be a big farmer who's good or bad in terms of environment, and you can be a small farmer who is good or bad in terms of environment. So I think it does need to, there's probably long drawn out conversations needed, and they're going to be difficult and tough to put some real, time into sorting these out. These are complex problems, and I think simple solutions don't really work. So I think we're all obliged to get stuck into them and to try and have the difficult conversations to try and thrash out what is the future here. And then the second part was that it's very interesting. People have very strong views about meat, and I think it's always one that upsets people. People have their views on.
I think you've gone there, Rob. Is he gone for everyone? Yeah.
I think it's just frozen.
Okay.
Still there, but frozen.
Maybe, Rob, if you take your camera off, you might be able to. Okay, just while we get Rob back, I suppose what I find interesting at the moment, because we have this cost of living crisis, and it's been driven a lot by energy prices. And I think what we've really started to realize is we don't have a lot of control over our energy, because a lot of it's global energy issues that are causing these high prices for us. And the way our farming policy has gone, we're not going to have a lot of control, and we don't have a lot of control over our food supply either. I think you're back with us there, Rob, are you?
Apologize for that. Now that hasn't happened in months, and of course it happens tonight. I'm not sure
you
at what point
I lost local TD about your broadband. But so I was just saying about in relation to the energy supply that we're seeing at the moment, that we're very vulnerable to the externalities of what's happening in Europe and globally. And I think our agriculture policy has driven us down that road as well. So our veg comes from overseas. Our meat can come from overseas. So actually, to have stronger, sustainable communities, we need to start, I think, bringing it back in, so it's more local to us. Paying people for the product that they're producing, and just having a more direct source of product for people to use as well. But sorry, Rob, do you want to continue there with what you were saying? You've gone again, have you?
I think he's frozen again.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, we'll.
Oh, no, he's back.
Oh, no, you're back. Are you back?
That's terrible timing. I'm not sure at what point I got cut off there. I think I was speaking about CAP, and I was going to speak about meat briefly. Maybe my chance is gone, is it?
No, you can work away. So you were talking about that there's a big focus on meat. And that,
well, yeah, I have a friend who sat next to a lady on a flight one time. It was a transatlantic flight, and she was choosing the vegan option for environmental reasons. And I thought it was very interesting, because I think in that it sort of does take the focus away. I often wonder, have the fossil fuel companies done an incredible job of convincing people to chase after loads of other things, when the bottom line is here, burning fossil fuels is what it's all about. And if somebody has, I think it's dangerous to put things that people can do as important, when it's like, if there's a choice of two things, I'll do this one. Whereas it gives you the feeling that you're helping the environment. And I'm not sure how much help it actually does. I think intensive and excessive and animal agriculture can be done lots of different ways. And there's organic agriculture, and there's even organic feedlots in America. So, I think how it's done in terms of to benefit the soil and to be sustainable and to be actually, positive for the environment, it can be done. Because let's not forget, when our soils were evolving, animals were a huge part of that. The buffalo in America used to graze, and they actually became responsible for one of the greatest soils in the world and in the Midwest. And it was grazing animals that did that. So I think, it maybe gets back to maybe looking at the different perspectives here. I would tend to go online and Google my own opinion and get things that reinforce that. There is an awful lot of debate there about well-done animals in a good farming system can actually benefit the environment. And I'm not saying there's no methane, but I'm saying, if the cycle is right, and if the balance is right, and if the inputs are right, it can be beneficial. Now, I think I'll leave it at that because it's often a thorny one, but there's just a lot more to that debate, I think, that meets the eye. If you allow for sequestration and if you allow for, well done, whether it's milk or dairy or or beef, there's a lot of room for positive farming when it comes to animals. There's one other thing, in case I get cut off again, and I'm sorry, that I do think we are lacking in Irish farming, the entrepreneurs and the markets for new crops. Kate has spoke at length about hemp there, and it's fantastic. There needs to be an industry to supply, so we can only grow things that we can sell. So I was very much thinking of the milling industry in this country is almost gone in terms of our own flour, our own mills. And then on top of that, crushing of oilseed rape in terms of an oil industry. We grow oilseed rape and a lot of it is exported. So I think those things are probably missing. There's definitely opportunities. So agricultural entrepreneurs, I'm not sure where they're going to come from, but a farmer can only grow what he can sell. And as Kate says there, she's got a great crop in hemp, but there needs to be people there demanding to want it. I think that maybe it links into maybe the organic conversation where there's been recent input into organic to push more people to go organic. But I think it's the consumers who would have to be converted as well, because if you oversupply a market, it's actually quite fickle. So I think in Sweden, they've been great successes with organic farming because it's the most profitable farming. So if you create a market, people will supply it. And that's the problem maybe with conventional agriculture, making a change. We're supplying a market that wants our produce. And if people want cheap food, this is how it's done. So I think the whole lot is linked together. If you change a farmer to stop growing cheap food and make him sort of, foot the difference, it's going to be very disruptive because it's not going to work,
Thank you, Rob. Now we've 5 minutes left. So there's a question here that I think is quite interesting because you both sort of spoke about getting young people and Holly, you just previously as well about getting young people into farming and how do we encourage that. So the question from Dahi O'Shea is what could the government do better to support small organic farmers or young people who are interested in getting into the agri-food sector? So Kate, do you want to go first on that?
Again, how will I put this? I take a lot of students on my farm from all over the world, but principally from Germany and France, because they're sponsored by their governments to do that. We don't seem to have any proper apprenticeship schemes for farmers, young people to go farming. I mean, the organic growers have a small apprenticeship scheme, but we need a lot more of it. I mean, Chagrin, trains everyone to such a high level that, they won't do the what I call the low level work, mucking out the stable or whatever, they all want to be managers. And I think that's a big problem in this country at the moment. Everyone wants to be a manager rather than doing the work. And, again, Chagrin, we're having a big conference in April in Ashtown, that's outside Dublin, for the hemp. So we'll advertise that, and that might give some ideas of how we can get that into policy. But again, getting women in. I have a daughter who's going to do a green cert now, but she can't drive a tractor and there's no courses available to show her. So, it's just practicality we want, and apprenticeship is the best practicality of all.
Okay, thank you, Kate. And Rob, do you want to?
This was around young people and encouraging sort of maybe people to get involved. I think it's similar to the grow the crops we can sell. If agriculture is providing a decent living for people, they'll be attracted to it. I know Kate was talking about long nights there and begrudgery and tough, seasons, but I really relish some of the hard work that we have to do here. And sometimes it can be a bit grueling, but I think you get great satisfaction. In life in general, I find that I get the most out of things that I put the most into. And if you have problems and if you have challenges, throwing yourself into them 100% is probably, go through. You can't just, run away. And that is true, especially when we get the challenges on the farm, that weather especially is a big one there that you just have to get stuck in. Young people, I guess, it's not cool to be farming anymore. Farming used to be a huge part of this country, and it's probably the roots of the country and a lot of the traditions around farming. And I think that, it's maybe slightly forgotten. I would have a real interest in American farming. And it seems to me that there's a huge kind of rural population that are really obsessed with farming and think it's great, and that, I don't want to use the word cool, but that sort of attraction towards it is something that is maybe lacking slightly. Now, the people who are into it are really into it, and there's great communities, but in a general sense, as we are, you know, an up and coming nation, and as our technology is great, and we've all these multinationals, that's a super thing. And it creates great opportunities. Like Kate says, a lot of people want to go to university, get a good degree, and go into a career job where you start at 25, 30 grand, and you keep going up and up and up. Farming doesn't offer maybe the same financially. It should do maybe slightly better, but I do think there's nothing like it. If you get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and some of our farm actually looks down into the Valley of Smallwood, and sometimes there's mist sitting in the bottom of it. The odd day you're working hard and you might just stop and you might catch a sunset and stuff like that. It's very hard to get that in another job, where sometimes there's a feeling of a mission. It's going to rain in 2 days and we have an incredible job to do here, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do it. That coming together and that feeling, people love the silage season, and it's madness the amount of work involved, but there's a real feeling of progress and coming together. And I don't know, can you get that from a job? You can get your wages from a job, but if you really care about your job and if you're emotionally invested in a job, then it pays you an awful lot more. So to try and bring that into some sort of a, I don't know, scheme where people get a glimpse of that. But I think financial stability is a massive one, because you shouldn't have to take a pay cut to come farming. That's the situation we are in now. And I don't think people come farming other than the fact that it's a family business and they love it, and they've maybe touched on it, or maybe they worked on an uncle's farm and they saw it during the summer. God, that was fantastic. I'd love to do that more. Don't think that answers the question, though. I'm sorry.
No, it does, and it's what do they say, that if your job is your passion, you won't work a day. So I think
we work really hard, Jennifer, but I take your point. Yeah, that's true.
With passion and enjoy it. Now, I didn't realize we actually have Anya O'Connell is in the audience, and she was hoping to get in. She's an IFA rep, so she's hoping to get in just to respond to some of the comments. Sabrina, I'm not sure whether we can actually bring people in.
Yeah, I can bring Anya in. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't speak out of turn about the IFA.
Yes. The black marks now are down.
Can you hear me?
We can, Anya. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can, but I can't seem to turn on my camera. Anyway, you can hear me, which is probably the main thing. Thanks for a very good seminar. It's well worth hearing and listening to differing views. I suppose when we talk with farmers, and I talk to farmers all the time, it can turn into a bit of an echo chamber where we're just talking amongst ourselves. So it's very good to get divergent views. But I think it's really important, particularly the IFA question at the start, as what can we do? And to be honest, I kind of half missed it, Rob, because I actually had to go out and help my father pull a calf in the middle of this seminar. But the IFA is working very, very hard for farmers. Yes, we're not environmental experts, but we do work with the experts in Teagasc and in UCD and UCC to try help develop and deliver the best policy for farmers. We try represent all farmers, and can be very difficult to do that. And there's just natural conflicts of interest. When tillage is going good, it cripples the pig farmer. When pigs, so there's conflict of interest between sectors that are natural, but we work to try bring everyone together to try and get a cohesive lobby that'll benefit all farmers. I think on Holly's point at the start about farming in the 90s, Holly, I'm the same age as you, I'm 32. And I grew up on a dairy farm. I'm still dairy farming. I'm married to a dairy farmer. I work as a dairy policy executive, and I have a dairy science PhD. So I'm passionate about it, and you're dead right. If you're passionate about a job, it isn't a job at all. But I think we have to be very careful about the way we describe Irish agriculture. In the 90s, we actually used more fertilizer than we do in the noughties. We exceeded over 400,000 tonnes in 4 years in the 90s. We only exceeded it in 1 year in 2018 in the last 20 years. And that was on the advice of Teagasc because of a drought. We are, as Rob said, I think we've amazing work to do and fascinating work to do on the way we manage our grasslands. I think we're going to see a revolution there, the way we did with breeding in the noughties. We've come along the way with breeding cows. We've bred cows to be far more robust and fertile. And it's gotten to the case where if we still had this 1990 cow model, shall we say, We'd need 300,000 more of her on this country to produce the same amount of milk. We have improved fertility and breeding so that we don't need as many cows. So we have to appreciate that. The idea that dairy and other industries such as pig and poultry has gotten more intensive is questionable. Since 2014, the average dairy size was 70 cows. It is now 83. There's only 4 dairy farms in the country that are over 1,000 cows. There's only 700 farms over 250, and there's 17,000 dairy farms in the country. When we look at water quality was worse in the 90s when we had 300,000 less dairy cows. When we look at the historic tradition of having mixed farms, the reason we had mixed farms was because of policy. Quota was introduced in 84, so we couldn't increase the dairy side, and beef payments came in. So the beef herd swelled to well over 1 million in the 90s because of the suckler cow premiums and the couple payments. So farmers always respond to policy, and that's why there was mixed farming. We have went back into streamlining our industries in order to make money. And unfortunately, farmers need to make a living too. When we look at the average price of milk in 2021, last year, the average price of milk was about 36 cents. It was 34 cents 10 years ago, and it was 33 cents 15 years ago. We have had to improve efficiencies and in order to maintain a living. And we have done that. Why? By using fertilizers more efficiently. Most intensive farms or farms stocked above 170 have nutrient management plans now to make sure that they don't waste an ounce of that fertilizer. We really look at calving to match our grass growth, which is our single most biggest advantage across the globe. 90% of our diet is our grass, and we can't forget that and we can't dismiss that. When I think of intensive agriculture, I think of my time in Wisconsin, where I did a lot of my research. And I look at a 7,000 cow dairy on a 5-acre plot where no feed was generated on the farm. That to me is intensive. We do not have massively intensive agriculture here. Yes, we have areas to improve. We need to improve water quality. We need to improve the way we mitigate emissions. But we're doing that. We're carrying out more low emission slurry spreading. It's up onwards of 40% of slurry now is spread with low emission slurry equipment. We've doubled the use of protected urea in 1 year alone. We'd double it again if it was available to us, but at the moment it isn't. So we do need to work together, but I think it's very important to realize where we've come from, that we've done an awful lot in the last decade, that we're now getting almost ostracized for. So I'd like to leave it at that. I think I've kind of answered a good few of the things that have come up, but IFA is there to be used by farmers. So if people want their voices heard, they should get involved with their local branches. It is the single largest farm organisation, and there's no point trying to reinvent the wheel and create another farm org when the framework is there to leverage. So I'd encourage people to get involved if they want to have their say and help us make informed decisions towards the future of our farming systems.
Great, thank you so much, Anya. Really, really good. I'm delighted that you're on the call this evening and that we had an opportunity to hear from it. It is, I suppose, tonight's session was about listening and about learning, and I think there's an awful lot. I mean, this is just the start of it. There's been so many different topics raised tonight. I think we could talk all night about different aspects of it and what needs to be done. And I think this is something that we're going to have to come back to. But thank you very much for getting involved in the conversation. And as you say, it is something that we will have to continue. Folks, we have gone way over. We're on 9:10 now. And I think I didn't get to all the questions. So I'm sorry if we didn't get to answer your question. If you want us to actually answer you could email the, I don't know if Sabrina will be collecting those questions, or if you want, you can always email us at either the Left Bank or our Social Democrats webpage or email addresses, and we'll try answer if you have any specific questions that you'd like answered. We will have this was being recorded, so we will have a recording of this that will be up on the up on YouTube, and I assume we'll be sending out a link to everyone to let you know where it will be. And yes, so the questions can go to the email address theleft.bank@socialdemocrats.ie. So I just want to thank everybody for contributing with your questions and discussion, and a huge thank you to Holly, Kate and Rob for a really, really fantastic discussion and just insights, just snippets, I think, of what we need to be talking about and where we need to be going, but it's a really good start. So thank you all, and I hope everyone who's listened enjoyed tonight.